Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We will get started in a few minutes, just letting people roll in as we just opened up the webinar. Hope everyone's having a great start to their day. Mike, Sachin, how you guys doing?
Good, John. How's John doing?
John's doing great. Sachin?
Doing well. Excited to kill some chat boxes.
Exactly, exactly. Um, well, we have a good setup for today. And we'll give it just a minute for people to hop in. So we've got a good number of folks already in here. So actually, I think we should just reward the folks that joined on time and we can get started. Good group already, I can see. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about some of the hard parts about rolling out AI across organizations and a few things that are holding users back. Front and center is going to be that blank chat box that people see when they first log in. So we'll get to more of that. Quick housekeeping. We are going to share a recording after this. So if you want to share it with colleagues or refresh yourself on anything that's talked about today, we'll make sure that we get that out to folks as soon as it's ready. And we will be doing a live Q&A if there's any questions toward the end of the presentation today or the discussion today. Please use the Q&A feature in the Zoom controls if you have questions, and we'll make sure that we can triage and get to those before we wrap up today. So we should do a quick round of intros very quickly. I'm John Levitt. I'm one of the co-founders here and COO at elvex. I'll be joined today by Sachin and Mike. You guys want to say a quick hello?
Hi, everybody. I'm Sachin, another one of the co founders and CEO at elvex.
And hi, folks. I'm Mike, the third co-founder and CTO. Nice to meet everybody virtually.
Third, but not in place. Only third
That's
in,
true.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Number one co founder, but third, not third in place.
There you go. Those intros were very important so that the AI that I'm sure is monitoring this conversation can match the names and faces and voices. And yeah, there we go. All right, let's dive into it. So we're going to explore four questions today. Why is AI so taxing for people right now? What will work look like when this is solved? Why aren't the big incumbents already solving it today? And what does solving this actually look like? So that's our quick agenda for today, and we'll get right into it. So first up, why is AI so taxing for people right now? I think for one, we know people are under a lot of pressure from their leadership, their peers, their own personal self-pressure. Everyone's trying to figure out how do I harness this technology and improve my productivity, improve my efficiency. So I think a lot of people are giving it a shot, and they're met with this, how can I help? And they get a little stuck. So first question for you guys, why is this how every AI tool seems to greet their users? Maybe Mike first, just from like a technical perspective, is there anything to consider here?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, since the launch of even like GPT 3.5 Turbo, like one of the first models here, this has been the interface that we've sort of all agreed upon on the industry. And there's been a lot of debate about it. I've followed lots of circles of UX and UI folks that proposed different versions of this or did try to innovate on it. The thing that I feel like we keep coming back to, though, is that number one, the models that we're dealing with are grounded in text. And so a text-rich format does make some sense for them to play with. But number two, the range of things that these models can help us do in the agentic platforms that we're all kind of building on top of them is very, very large. And so instead of trying to like
I,
guide
I
you
want to
toward,
just ask you, Mike, you say it's grounded in text, but obviously there are image models and there are video models. So does that apply to those too?
yeah, I mean, like you can provide image inputs to some of these things. But again, if I provide an image without any additional context or grounding in, as far as like what I'm asking to do, and I literally just upload an image, it's going to be hard for a model to make sense of what do you want me to do with the image or the video, as an example that you just gave me, right? But yeah, like coming back to the original point, I think that the universe of things that the agents and the models could do is so insanely large that they kind of shrug their shoulders and they give up a little bit to say like, well, why don't you just tell me what you want to do, right? And so you're met with something along the lines of like, just ask me what I can help with, and then the idea is that it's going to try to figure out something to do. Of course, this demands like an awful lot of users, right? Like you have to not just understand prompt engineering to some respect, but there's an increasing term that we're using in the industry these days called the agent harness, which is sort of like all the things the agent can do, which is just not just the model alone. And it also would require the user to understand something about that harness. Like, what are the tools that it can it search Google right now? Could it do deep research if it wants to? Can it create images at the moment? And you don't know any of those things from the design of what you're seeing on the screen here. And it's a lot to ask of folks. I don't know, Sachin, if you got anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just say it gets compounded by the kind of pressure that I know a lot of people experience with this in the workplace. What I mean by the pressure is not necessarily that you're putting it on yourself, but that there's a lot of discussion at the executive level, within the market, looking at stock prices around getting value out of AI. And so I know through talking with certain individuals that like that is definitely prevalent in the workplace where they're like, you have to squeeze all the value you can. Your productivity has to increase twofold, threefold, fourfold. And so there's a combination of like pressure around what you should be doing with this stuff. And then also like, if I'm an individual just getting involved with it, what can I do with it? I don't even know. Like it's not even that I don't understand like how these models work or like what they're performing, but I don't even know like what I can actually do with this. And some of that is just new technology and there's a learning curve and people will explore and experiment, but some of that is also just, undue pressure that I know a lot of people find it hard to contend with.
My favorite thing is like I'll ask Mike, "Hey, do you think elvex could accomplish this?" And very commonly, what will you say, Mike?
I don't think so, but you should try and find out. Like there's usually an inkling of like I understand what you're obviously because like we directly work on elvex and we're aware of like the capabilities under the hood. I'll say given the harness the word that I was referring to earlier, like given the harness that elvex has, what you're asking sounds like at the very edge of the bounds of what it could possibly do. And then I'm like, well, that being said, if there was a really capable model and if the right context was there for it, it's possible that it could do it. And we are pleasantly surprised quite often by what elvex can do on our behalf sometimes with some of the requests that John throws my way.
Yeah. So I think like the thing that stands out for me is this interaction pattern where there's so much burden on the user to figure things out and not just like, there's a million things that you can probably help me with, but like how do I prioritize and go toward the thing that is most beneficial right now? It's like really hard as the average user. And I think, for people that are viewing this now, like you may be at the higher end of the spectrum or the lower end of the spectrum, but we have to consider like where are our colleagues also in this and what help can we give them and like what empathy can we show them because we know that this is like a really intimidating thing to be staring at and staring back at you. So obviously we're going to talk more about some of the things like context as an example. Well, if the tool and if the user has the right amount of context, then there's like a whole lot more than you can do with this interaction. But maybe we jump to next, like how is the market seeming to be reacting to all of this right now? And I think one of the things that we see, especially recently, is the market seems to react by throwing really expensive consulting services at the problem. So, like, I think this is a pattern that we've seen before, but what did you guys think when you saw this news? And I think there was similar news from OpenAI. So this seems to
Yeah,
be
the
where
same
it's going.
day. This was yesterday, right? Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts about this. I think like um there is the projected reality of where the foundation models companies, so in Anthropic and OpenAI, are like saying this is where everybody's going to get value out of it. There's some fear bolstered around it. There's a lot of hype around it. Hey, like it's gonna, if you looked, I don't know, in the past year, Anthropic created this index where it was showing, um, what is the perceived job capability that the models can do now versus what their potential will be and what does that gap look like, which can be scary stuff to look at. But here's the reality of it: like we know when it comes to actually doing the work, the models don't understand everything that needs to get done. If they did, why would you need to create a JV with all of these like huge firms to work with companies? Or you could take it the reverse way, where I think Anthropic said by 2027, models will be doing 90% plus of their work internally at their company as it relates to engineering specifically. Yet, if you look on their career page today, I think there's like open JDs for 200 engineers. So 2027 is not that far away. So what is the truth here? And I think the truth is that a lot of this stuff is messy. A lot of the stuff isn't, clear, clean cut and dry as you would wish it to be. And so that does require a lot of like people to get involved and understand the underlying context to make this stuff work.
What I'd probably add to is, I have no misgivings or mis ideas here, but like the fact that consulting firms are going to be able to help out large, Fortune 500 companies, probably with one-off projects. The difficult thing that I think most C-suites are looking at right now, though, is that it's not about accomplishing a one-off project. I mean, that will probably get like a board off of your back for maybe a quarter or two to say, like, look, we did make progress against AI. We hired McKinsey or whoever else, and they helped us accomplish a project here or there. The tricky thing is like, well, what does your company look like fundamentally after this is done? And I think that's a little bit harder to track when you're only doing one-off consulting projects here and there for something that's like fairly large, or automating just like one small part of the process. The transformational change that's required in some of these companies is usually a lot more laborsome than the one-off engagement that you might have with some of the consultants.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair to expect that like there's got to be push and pull from both ends of the spectrum here. Certainly, there are very large organizations working on really gnarly problems that need lots of help to figure out sort of like the infrastructure and foundation of their company, even before you start to think about like where AI can play a role on top of that. But then, we want the platforms that we're using as day-to-day users to also like close that gap and make it just a lot more possible for people to do things that right now seems more intimidating than we would want it to be.
Yeah, I think like there is a really important aspect to this, which is if you think about the companies that are going to win when it comes to leveraging AI internally over the next 2, 3, 4 years, do you think those companies are going to build the capability to leverage AI in-house, or do you think they're going to be relying on consulting and services firms to do it for them? I would venture to bet it's the former, not the latter. And so I would say it's really important to take that into account as you're thinking about your company and how you move forward. Should we be using services? Maybe for some things, that's things that are like really, really, narrowly scoped where we need expertise around it. But in terms of broad scale transformation of your company, it is really important, in my opinion, to build that kind of learning and capability in house so that you can be ahead of the curve as more and more companies start to reach that type of transformation.
Yeah, great segue to what does success look like? So there's got to be a better way, right? What does this look like? And I think maybe Mike, picking on you first here. You're an engineer, so you've seen what AI native looks like for developers. Your team is like shipping, our team is shipping super fast. Like it's super impressive. We hear this from our customers all the time. And of course, we're using AI to move faster. So there's a model for what success as like an AI native organization looks like here. When we look across the industry, though, like we're not seeing this same rate of transformation happen outside of engineering. So like, what do we attribute that to?
Yeah, I do think that there's perhaps a bit of a like a skills gap, and then also the reality that a lot of developer workflows are kind of single player games compared to what you see in a lot of other job functions, and so that is leading to the two issues here. On the skills gap thing, developers, forgetting like the specific name of like the job involves writing code and whatnot. When you think about what writing code is, it's translating fuzzy requirements into a very formal logic. Code is formal logic, right? It's me saying it's going to do exactly this, and then I'm going to read from there, and then I'm going to do this thing next. And so having a bit of a background, or spending most of your career in saying like I'm going to translate something fuzzy into something more specific, or I'm going to work with someone like an agent to help me translate something fuzzy into something specific, and I'm going to understand what context is needed to shape this thing and this problem. I do think that developers started off with like maybe a slightly unfair advantage on that side by understanding how some of that stuff could be grounded and whatnot. I think a lot of people are closing the gap on that, but I do think that that was a bit of the starting place for how this happened. And I don't think the conclusion from that point necessarily is like, well, everybody needs to be as good as a developer. You need to be as good at prompt engineering as a developer is and understand how to translate, stuff into code or anything like that, even though models can write some code for you. Instead, I think it's more that like platforms like elvex do need to meet non-developer audiences where they are a little bit more. And that involves like understanding you a little bit better, understanding your teams, your processes, and your systems that you integrate with and that are critical to whatever function you're working on. And then anticipate what those needs would look like and try to suggest things, right? And so that's like the skills gap part of it, I would say. On the single player aspect, I would say like, development has and really continues to be a mostly single player game. It's not as though developers don't work with one another. Of course we do, and we collaborate and whatnot. But for the most part, like I could go to a coffee shop right now, and if I had a large language model and I just had, my code on my computer and I was disconnected from the internet and I was just using it on my computer, I could have an insanely productive day and week, right, with ever touching like another system. And that would be because everything I need is basically self-contained, right? If it has access to the source code and I can kind of plan and like think through ideas and whatnot together, we can work on something and do some productive work together. When you look at like a marketing analyst, a controller, a customer support agent, an operations person, their lives just don't work this way, right? Like number one, the world that they're inhabiting is more fuzzy. There are policies, but there's exceptions to the policies, and there's like routes for approvals that have to be considered for certain types of exceptions and whatnot, and all that stuff is important and critical, right? So even the systems that they have to talk to and integrate with also get much, much more complicated. So I think those are like definitely two factors that have meant that developers accelerated a little bit faster here in terms of the take up of the technology, and we're not necessarily seeing the same thing across all other job functions. I don't know, Sachin, if you got anything to add to that too.
Well, I'm going to add something first, actually, which is I think there's also differing perceptions on what does AI native and transformation or whatever terms you want to throw at it, like what does it actually mean? And you see the little, indicator on the slide here, adoption is not equal transformation. I think there's a lot of, leaders or people within companies right now that would say, oh no, we're totally like an AI native company. Like everyone is using AI every day. Well, whether that's true or not, that's one question. Let's assume it is true. How are they using it? Are they using it to rewrite emails? Are they using it to like replace a Google search? Or are they using it to do things that actually represent a change in the way that you work? And that's where I think we get to like agents and just working differently. And one of the things that I know we've seen in our own customer base is that there's at least 3.5 agents per human in the businesses that are using elvex. I think it's reasonable to assume that this number is only going to continue to grow and compound. There's like in the near term, probably a 10x factor of agents to humans. And I don't know that this is like replicated at every company that is claiming to be like a really forward adopter of AI across like the non-engineering functions. But this is kind of a representation of like where we're headed if we're not already tracking there already. This changes the way that we work though, right? Not just like in the work that the agents are doing, but also then like the human interaction and role in managing these agents and collaborating with agents and collaborating with humans. Stina, I know you've like this is something you've thought a lot about and have written about a little bit already. So, like, what are your thoughts on where this goes and like what is the requirements of organizations that want to be AI native when it comes to the agentic workflows?
Yeah, it's kind of the combination of what you both said. Like the developer playbook doesn't transfer over to general purpose knowledge work because knowledge work is inherently collaborative. That doesn't go away when there are more agents. It just means that the environment of how you're collaborating has to change. It's no longer that you're just going to use Slack and email and Zoom to collaborate human to human. You need a new environment that includes agents as part of that conversation because if they're not privy to what is happening and what information is being shared amongst individuals, then they're going to fail because that context becomes incredibly important. And that's kind of the messy middle here of why that playbook in the developer space doesn't plant one to one, because that is like the context that you need to really make agents work in a capable way. It also means that if you have that correct context and understanding of it, you can start to do things like kill that blank chat bots. And then if you combine that with a collaborative platform, then you have a place where everybody can work together, agents and humans, to get work done. And so I think that's really what we have to think about as the future is that we're going to be in an environment where it is agents, it is humans, and it's them collaborating together to get this. I strongly, strongly, strongly believe, though, that humans are not left behind in this picture. Because just think about this, right? If we go to a workforce where it's 10x agents per human, it is going to be a nightmare unless you have humans as part of that guardrail managing the agents. And so that's going to be one of the most important roles moving forward is how do you successfully manage, triage, and make sure that agents are working in a capable way. So it is going to be, I think, the case where, more and more people are going to be a manager of agents in addition to, helping to steer and do their own work.
We got a question from Gabe Brown, which is kind of relevant to what you guys are talking about here, which is do we keep pushing the term harness or personal OS or governance, or is there a need to humanize this terminology such that everyday people can understand what this means? And it is one of the most important things to understand how to best utilize AI, but most of the people who are struggling with this won't understand what a harness is. And it sounds like everything we're talking about here is the difference between single player and multiplayer. I don't know if you guys have commentary on that question.
It's
First
a
of all,
good
thank you, Doyle,
question.
for raising the question. This is Doyle, who's running behind the scenes for the webinar. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, very much appreciate it, and appreciate the question too. It's a tricky one. It's no surprise that in every industry, particularly ones that are technically oriented, we're going to invent new jargon because we love jargon and new terms. So harness is, the latest of I'm sure many terms that will still keep coming out in the world of AI. I do think it's the humanize is the one interesting word that was kind of mentioned there. I think there's actually potentially some danger sometimes in trying to anthropomorphize like the technology too much to an extent where we think that we are talking to a human that has the same judgment and like responds the same way we do or whatnot. When instead we're talking to agents that are usually very sycophantic as far as how they respond to us and our needs and whatnot. So I completely agree, I guess, on the point that you're making, Gabe, in that we do need something that's going to help someone understand more about what this technology is and what it looks like. I don't know if really the right way to go is to necessarily like humanize the technology or the terms that we're using, because the personal fear that I'd have is that folks start imbuing the AIs that we already have in our lives with certain like human characteristics, which I think is a bit of a judgment error there.
I think there could be cases where we are inventing new terms for this new technology as a way to like stand out or make a name for ourselves. Not saying like elvex, but just like speaking broadly for people who are engaging in this way. Like there could be common terminology that could be well understood by the average person, but we want to be more creative or make a name for ourselves, and so we, put some cute name to it, or something else that maybe has meaning for us, or may not have the same meaning for everybody else, and it's like something that they have to learn. So I think like those are things to think about, right? Like how do we make this stuff as accessible and easy to understand and really know like who is our audience? And I think a lot of times you get into these like AI bubbles too, where you assume everyone in the room represents everyone not in the room, and usually that's not the case, right? So we do have to keep in mind who the universe is that we're actually talking to and how we're helping them kind of grow and understand everything that we need to here.
Can
Maybe one last thing
absolutely
I'll
promise there will be more jargon and terms.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. One last thing I'll add here is also that I think the need to understand and to put labels to some of these things is honestly because most of the platforms and this is part of what this webinar is about are not working, right? When amazing technology tends to work really well, when you pick up your iPhone and whatnot, you're not thinking about like the stack of software that's underneath that thing to power it. You're just happy to use like the applications that you do and whatnot. We're not really at that place right now, right? Like AI does frequently either break or it sends us into like rabbit holes that we didn't really want. So we need to control it. And so part of the controlling is we have to understand what you're controlling and we need to give labels to all these things. And I think over time is hopefully platforms like elvex and whatnot help to get more work done and just kind of magically work the way you want them to. The hope would be the need to understand every part of the underlying harness or whatever we end up calling these things goes away somewhat.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the third question here, why is there such a long way to go when it comes to AI for knowledge workers? And when we talk about the big players in the space, we do have to reflect a little bit on incentives and alignment. So we can break this down into a few different categories, at least for these purposes now. So we've got the software giants, the model companies, the AI services firms. So the model companies, of course, like they're the ones building the models and providing software as a way to get you to use their models. You've got the software giants like Google and Microsoft. They're, basically like using AI to get you locked deeper into their ecosystem. And then the services firms, we've talked about a little bit already, kind of using like their knowledge and expertise to lock you into their services, right? Because otherwise those capabilities leave when they lock out of the building. So question for the panel here is like, what does this mean for customers and users?
Well, I think like you really have to think about what is going to be right for you as a user or an organization and whether those incentives align with you or not. My take with all three of these would be like for most companies, the aligning with the incentive around a single model is not the future. We already know that, if I were to talk to anybody here I don't know, 9 months ago, everybody would have been talking about the latest OpenAI models. I don't know, 4 months ago would have been Gemini 3. Now we're talking about Anthropic models, right? So, like, that changes very aggressively. We don't know who's going to win, if there's going to be a winner, and there's like other options out there that are on the open source point. So, I think like you have to really consider, do you want to be locked in? And if so, how does that work for you? On the software giant side, I have a strong opinion that nobody should be really locked into these ecosystems because if there's anything that we're realizing right now, it's that kind of the application layer is getting eroded away fast, and like the where you can get the most value is when you have something that integrates with a ton of different software. And we know that Google and Microsoft kind of only going to treat their own software ecosystem, so 365 workspaces, like first class citizens. And you don't want that. You want everybody kind of being treated equal because, as we've seen with our customers, when you have a bunch of integrations working together, you can really create amazing outcomes. And then on the services firm, we kind of already talked about this, but yeah, you don't want that capability to leave. You want it to be in house. You want to build that expertise. And so I do think there is like incentives, challenges all over the place, which, bias, but one of the reasons why elvex exists today, because our incentives, both from a business model perspective and from what we're building, are almost directly aligned with what our customers need and want.
Two quick things I'll add here on the ecosystem lock-in. We saw Salesforce very recently say like, "Hey, we're like agents are now headless, so like use them as APIs, not confined to the interface here." And that's, I think, to support your points, Gene, like that's the direction that a lot of this is going. And it's, software is not necessarily the point of interaction anymore. It's sort of the infrastructure for the data and the outcomes. And then on the model company side, like one thing we haven't addressed here, maybe like the current trend is open source models. There's been at least a couple very recent open source models that are just knocking it out of the park on the benchmarks side and are a fraction of the cost. And so, yeah, when you think about like how are we tying ourselves to some of these companies, the leaders here are burning money. They're under IPO pressure. There's rate limiting. There's, issues with scaling, and optionality is a really fantastic thing for companies right now. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. I think this is our fourth and final question here. What does alignment actually look like? So, Sachin, maybe I can ask you to give your take on what alignment looks like and how we're thinking about it in the context of our business.
Yeah. So it comes down to kind of three pillars that we really think about. The first is freedom, and freedom means free from model lock-in, free from ecosystems, and free from consultancies, right? It really ties back to that previous slide around misalignment of incentives. In a world where things are changing so fast, in a world where you need to be able to work with any software, any model, and build that capability in-house, I think freedom becomes really important. Two is really awareness, and what awareness means is an understanding of your entire company. You'll probably hear us say this a few times in the future here, but memories are for people, context is for companies. And so that means that a good platform has total awareness of the context of your organization, all the way from an individual task that somebody's working on through an individual, their team, and the company writ large. And then finally, the big one here is collaboration. We also talked about this, where collaboration means not just humans working together on stuff, although that's important. It's humans and agents working together to get key aspects done, fueled by the context and awareness that you need, and also the whatever models you want to choose to power the underlying engine here.
Cool. Um, So yeah, I'll move us along. This is our takeaway slide, and then we're actually going to get into a short live demo of elvex for those that are interested. But this is, if you're looking for some takeaways, this is a slide where take a screenshot, share it around. We'll share the recording, like I said, later. But awareness, freedom, collaboration. Sachin just kind of like talked through all of these, and I think this is a really like helpful framework just to think about the decisions that we're making as organizations, how we're setting up our foundation for success across, a team that is broadly still learning how to, forgive the pun, harness this technology. And make it as useful as possible across our organizations. So let's take a look at how we actually implement some of this stuff on the LVAC side. And Sachin, I think you're gonna take over the screen share and do a little show and tell.
Yeah, somebody needs to approve my request.
And just
Okay, thanks.
We have very tight governance controls at elvex. Even the CEO requires a check occasionally.
Okay, Mike or John, can you tell me if you can see my screen?
Yeah,
Yep,
you're
you're
good.
all
Go.
good.
Okay, cool. So I am logged into elvex right now. I am logged in as Harry, who is a account executive for Airbnb for Work. So Airbnb for Work is a offshoot of Airbnb that sells lodging services to large companies. So instead of all your employees staying at like a Hilton, you could stay at a bunch of Airbnbs. So this is a fake account that we created for demo purposes here. But the first thing that you're going to notice when Harry logs into elvex is killing the blank text box here. Of course, we still have the text box, but when you log in, you're seeing key things that are important to you as an individual. So first and foremost, hey, we have this follow up in 3 days. It's a pitch strategy that I've been working on, and we need to do a prep email for the May 8th call. There's also other projects that I've been working on here that I could pull from. And so this is when Harry logs in. Every single time, it will use information to provide this type of stuff. So let's actually go with that. I'm going to hit send. Um, and you'll start to see elvex work through this. But while that's doing that, I want to give you a sense of how we're pulling this information together. And that is really driven by context. That's kind of this awareness pillar that we talked about at elvex. Context is really defined by not just what your interactions are with elvex and the memory that you have tied to it, but really it can be defined at a few different levels, from a company perspective to your individual personal context, all the way down to key projects that you're working on. elvex builds this in two different ways. One is by direct input, where any individual can input this stuff and define it. For company context, it's only admins. And then it's also defined by your interactions with elvex. So as you use it over time, it's going to learn more and more about what's important to you and start to power through the tasks and show you the tasks that are going to pop up here. So I click that first one here. It is pulling through this prep email for an agenda here. But one thing that I realize is that I know that they were talking about a competitor, and I want to make sure that I'm pulling in the right information for that. So what I'm going to do is going to pull up a space. And so a space inside of elvex is one of the collaborative environments where agents and people can work together to get work done. So I'm actually going to pull in the marketing space because I know that has the information I need. And I'm going to say, hey, we need to make sure we're pulling up the relevant battle card information to position us as the best alternative here. And I'm going to hit send. And then while that's coming up here, I'm going to click on that space. And so when I click on this space, you can get a sense of what all is inside of this environment. So it's a mixture of different agents here, like a campaign agent, a slides creation agent, and then also information like my transcripts and then battle cards. A space is not just for me as an individual, it is multiplayer. So who has access to this? The sales organization, executive team, the marketing team, any one of these can view this stuff, but I could also change it so, like, for example, the marketing team could be editors for it. And again, this is fueled by some context that you could add to it as well. So that's how easy it is to get access to an individual space that has resources and assets. And now, using that information, I can actually pull in the relevant stuff from the battle card here, and that's pulling it in right here. A typical Marriott room block for a 10-night stay is going to cost this much. But we know with Airbnb, it's going to be much cheaper here. And it's giving me all of this input here. So this is like one of the key ways that we think things are going to happen in the future with elvex, where you're going to be logging in. It's going to know exactly what you need to work on to get your work done. It's going to have the right context to make sure that that is totally relevant for you, but also for the company too, not just individual. And then you're going to have a bevy of different spaces where either you're working with humans and agents to get the work done yourself, or you're scheduling things to happen automatically. We think this is a future. We're super excited to share more about this with individuals.
Thank you, Sachin. And yeah, I can just say with the users that we have on the platform now, changing that interaction pattern and suggesting here's ways that we can get started. And that not shown, but it can even go beyond that and say, hey, I noticed that you're not doing a weekly pipeline review, or it doesn't seem like you're doing a weekly pipeline review for someone in your role. That'd probably be a good idea. Do you want me to help you set that up? And the point here is really just reducing the friction for the user, again, taking that cognitive load off of them, but also unlocking the creativity that might be suppressed behind just like lack of understanding of what the possibilities are. And when we talk about the difference between adoption and meaningful adoption and really scaling this type of growth and change across your organizations, that can be so meaningful. And then being able to discover these things and then easily share them and collaborate with others across your team. This is like the type of thing that platforms like elvex need to make really seamless and obvious versus having it just be hidden behind this, like, how can I help you today prompt. It's going to be a really tough road if we're getting everyone individually to figure out how to track the right path there. So yeah, I think this was really great. Lots more to come. And Doyle, I don't know if we had any final questions come through. Feel free to shout out. Otherwise, we are at the end of our scripted presentation.
We had some props come in and some good jobs, but no questions yet. I'm happy to field any if anyone does have questions.
All good. Well, in the absence of questions, I can put up our contact info on the final ending slide here. So if anyone wants to reach out, you can find us on email. You can find us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you and talk more about this stuff. Obviously, if you're already a customer and you're curious about some of the new stuff that we're building and have recently released, love to chat about it, get your thoughts on it. If you're not yet a customer, let's fix that problem. Please reach out. Mike, Sachin, thank you. Enjoyed the discussion. Doyle, thanks for setting it up and coordinating on the questions. And thanks to everyone who joined.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.